Andrew Brunette is either very confident he is returning to the Nashville Predators as the head coach next season, or he conducted his first job interview for his next coaching gig with his end of season media availability.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this week's episodes shouting out our Locked On Predators insiders and, of course, our everydayers who tune in each and every weekday to talk Nashville Predators hockey. It is going to be a crazy off season. We appreciate you all hanging in with us as we see what is next for this team. I am Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio, and friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Emma Lingan, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
The season is blessedly over. And I say that with mixed emotion because, friends, it was a really tough season for the Nashville Predators. But now comes the Hocktopsy. Now we dissect what went wrong. We had media availability on Friday with head coach Andrew Brunette and with players from the Nashville Predators roster. This week, we are going to share with you what we learned. And today we are kicking it off with the comments from head coach Andrew Brunette. Very interesting media availability Friday with him. We're going to share some of what he had to say. We're going to talk about the decision that it lies ahead for Barry Trotz and what we think may or may not happen behind the bench for the Nashville Predators. Emma, interesting media availability on Friday. I really appreciated the openness that I think we got from the players that we spoke to. We spoke to, of course, a lot of the core players, several of the younger players as well. So like I said, throughout the week, we're going to touch on some of what they had to say about this season and moving forward. And then we sat down after we talked with the players. We sat down with Andrew Brunette. It was a really interesting media availability for me. And I don't know if maybe I read it different. It just had a different vibe almost to me about it because I left Bruno's media availability thinking one of two things. Either he has already been told he is coming back and he is very confident in what's next for him, or he is not sure at all what's happening with his job and he is putting it out there who he is for whichever team may come next. Like, did it feel like what did it feel like to you as you listened to Andrew Brunette's comments? Kind of what was your overall vibe takeaway?
The more we got closer to the end of the season, I personally started thinking, obviously it's known by now what I think Barry Trotz should do with Andrew Brunette, which is kindly show him the door. But the closer we got to the end of the season, I was like, oh, he's not going to fire him, is he? He's not going to do it. But the thing is, I think if you're Barry Trotz, you have to, on one hand, and I feel like this is kind of wishful thinking a little bit, but on one hand, he could have come out clearly and said, Andrew Brunette is our coach. We are sticking with him. But he would have to have a damn good justification and explanation for that, which, I mean, maybe he could come up with. But he hasn't done that yet. And so on one hand, you're thinking, okay, well, maybe that means that's our answer. That means that he's staying. But on the other hand, it's like, well, maybe he does have, and we've talked about this before, maybe he does have someone in mind, but he needs that someone to be available before he's going to depart from Andrew Brunette. And if the available person, or I'm sorry, if the targeted person is not available or doesn't end up becoming available, then if you're Barry Trotz, you stick with the known rather than the unknown. So as far as, if that's just my interpretation of where Barry Trotz is at. So if I'm
Mhm.
Andrew Brunette, I am thinking kind of the same thing. It's like, well, I'm still the coach. I don't think, again, he hasn't been told firmly one way or the other. He knew he was keeping his job through the end of the season because Barry Trotz did come out and say that. But I think that either way, the fact that he did bring this up, he kind of slid it in there. He said, like, I'm here to coach, whether that's here or somewhere else. That's not a direct quote, but it's something, he said something to that effect. And so I do think that he's not stupid. Like, he's aware of the reality of the situation. So I think that the fact that he even said that, the whether it's here
Yeah.
or somewhere else part, indicates to me that he is not confident one way or the other.
Yeah. The press conference that we had with Andrew Brunette kicked off basically with that question. Andrew Brunette, what do you see as your future? And the comments you're referring to, Emma, we're gonna play this clip. This is Andrew Brunette's kind of opening response to the general question of like, what do you make of what's coming next for you? This is what Bruno said.
Yeah, I'm here to coach. Love my job, love my team until I'm told otherwise. I'm going to continue to work and become a better coach. And I think I'm an extremely competitive person. Sometimes it doesn't always come out that way, but and I think our group is an extremely competitive group. And we're not where we want to be. It was not from a lack of care or work. It just didn't happen. And myself and my staff, we're going to go back to work. And I think we're going to take a breath. We're going to analyze, find out what we can do better, where we can do better, what went wrong. Don't have all the answers right now. I think for me, just clear my head a little bit, but I'm looking forward to finding solutions. Like I said, I played a long time, and my path wasn't the easiest path. And what I loved about the game probably the most was finding ways. And this is a great challenge, and I can't wait to start. And if I'm told otherwise, I feel very confident in my ability to continue that path.
So there it was. And this is what I thought was so interesting, Emma. Andrew Brunette, I really appreciate him just from a purely media person standpoint because he is very forthcoming. You don't struggle to get him to answer questions. And a lot of us have asked throughout the course of the season, like, hey, what do you make of the lack of scoring? What do you make of the inability to get results? What do you make of the road record versus the home record and such the disparity? And often he was very open and honest and authentic and saying, I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But we came into this press conference on Friday, and even in that clip, you hear him say, I find solutions, and I am confident that I am going to find solutions. And I think it does, just from a practical standpoint, you can be confident you're going to find solutions because now you're not in it. You're not like, hey, we have to prep for the next game that's in 24, 48 hours. And you can take a breath and you can step back and you can look at the forest, but it just felt different. I am, confident I can find the solutions. And it's like all season long, we've been waiting for just an indication of like, you can identify sort of like, hey, this is the problem. Maybe not make the adjustment, but at least you have an idea of like, hey, this is why I think it is going the way that it is. And we didn't get a lot of that during the season. Some of that, like I said, could be because it's very difficult to pinpoint big picture problems when you have to focus on small picture next steps. He sounded very confident, and I left thinking, you either know that you're coming back or you are very uncertain if you were coming back, and that was your first introduction job interview to 31 other general managers across the league. It just had a different vibe to me. Not in a good way, not in a bad way. I didn't feel like I was being hoodwinked by Andrew Brunette. The vibes were just different from him for me, and I will be very interested to see what comes next from Barry Trotz, because here's what's real. We are waiting this week to hear from Barry Trotz. And Emma, tell me if you read this differently, but I feel like we will know this week from Barry Trotz. Either Andrew Brunette is behind the bench next season or he is not. I suspect we will have that decision this week from Barry Trotz. Or do you think he's going to take more time to think about it?
I think that when we first got, communication from the team that Andrew Brunette would hold his media availability the same day as the team, and then Barry Trotz would talk next week. That when I saw Barry Trotz will talk next week, that's kind of when I was like, all right, that's when he's going to give us his decision. Maybe buying him some more time. I don't know. But I think that, if he felt confident that, Andrew Brunette is my ride or die, no matter what happens, no matter who becomes available, this is the guy that I want, then I think they would have done their press conference together. And that would have been Andrew Brunette or Barry Trotz showing his faith in Andrew Brunette. That's typically how it goes. It's usually the GM and the coach go together. And I know like 2 years ago, it was David Poile, Barry Trotz, and John Hines rather together. And then they fired John Hines. But, then I think last year, wasn't it Barry Trotz and Andrew Brunette together?
I believe it was. Yes.
And so this time I'm like, I am not trying to, I'm not trying to stir the drama cauldron. We know that's not what I'm here for. But I'm like, it's something that may be worth noting. I am not saying that, everybody, like it's coming, he's getting fired. I'm just saying, if he does get fired, let's keep this in our back pocket and be like, aha, that was a sign. So I think that, and then at the same time, people might say, well, if he was going to get fired, why would they make him speak to the media? Well, because if they didn't make him available to the media, that also tells us that he's getting fired. So it's like, they're not going to do that before they're ready. So anyway, I think that I agree with you. I think that we will know. I think that we will know this week, because people saw when, a couple days ago, Greg Cronin got fired, Peter Laviolette got fired, and everyone's like, oh, okay, where's Bruno? Like, it's coming. And it's like, well, not necessarily. That, people thinking that, because he didn't get fired on this day that 2 other coaches got fired, then that means he's sticking around. And it might, but it also might not.
Right.
I think that we will have an answer this week.
Yeah. Andrew Brunette did mention in that clip that he needs some time to clear his head, but he is all about finding solutions. Coming up, we're going to share what else he had to say about this season going so wrong. And then we're going to talk about what Barry Trotz absolutely has to weigh as he makes his decision about next season. Today's episode is brought to you by our great friends at Game Time. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you have never been to a live NHL playoff game, friends, it is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it is really next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost up front. You're going to get no surprise fees at checkout. The app even shows you panoramic seat views so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Emma, we're talking about Andrew Brunette. We're talking about, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back? When will we know? What is Barry Trotz going to weigh? Also want to play a clip here. This was Andrew Brunette kind of talking about what went wrong this season. And we're going to kind of take a look at it, sort of how he laid out how this season unfolded. This is what he had to say.
I wish I had an answer. I think for me, I got to reflect. a little bit. I'd be speaking, probably not fully digest, of what went wrong or how it went wrong or why it went wrong. There's lots of things to improve on for sure. I just felt, we talked about a lot of the year with you guys that, we got off to the start and we thought it'd be maybe a little bit too easy. We thought chemistry would come easy, and it didn't. And we worked really hard to try to connect a little bit better. I didn't think we were connected early. I thought we lost our structure a little early because we're chasing so many games, and we developed a few bad habits, and then frustration leaked in. And frustration's such a dangerous feeling, and it kind of leaked in, and it took us a while to get out of that. And unfortunately, by the time we tried to push out, we missed an opportunity to get off to a good start.
Basically, the Nashville Predators season was a series of unfortunate events, my friends. And Andrew Brunette sort of laid out how it went, starting with expectations. And this was a word we heard from Andrew Brunette. This is a word we heard from the players. The expectations going into this season were poison almost. That's my word. That's not their word, and Andrew Brunette said we thought it would be easier than it was. And I don't know that the team thought that consciously. We talked earlier in the season about, like, are some of the Predators players deferring to these new players? Kind of what is it that isn't working based on these expectations? One of the things that I think is so interesting is part of what played into expectations was not just the Stamkos and Marchessault signing, Emma, but I think it was how they finished last season. And now you have to go back and you have to look at, like, that 18-game point streak and how they made it into the postseason and that postseason series against Vancouver and say, was that the real Nashville Predators, or was that the fluke? And that kind of weird, not really ever going to be recreated 18-game point streak, did it feed into this false sense of confidence? Because we left thinking, okay, they finally got it. It clicked. They finally got it last season in this 18-game point streak. They're going to carry that we got it into this season with these new additions. And it all just fell flat. When you hear them talking about the expectations, how do you see that being a negative for this team this season? How did that affect them?
Well, this isn't the first time I've said this, but in hindsight, looking back at that 18-game point streak, I now think that that's probably the worst thing that could have happened to them.
I love that you say that.
Because, and that is not me saying that wasn't real or it was just a fluke, but it is me saying that they don't get Stamkos, Marchessault, Shea. They don't make those signings if they don't have that 18-game point streak first. And everyone's talking about, oh, great, they missed the playoffs the year before. They got a new coach, a new GM this year, and this was last year, saying that they made the playoffs. Great. Okay, but they needed to literally make history to make the playoffs. It was an historic achievement that they had that 18-game point streak. They weren't cruising into the playoffs by any means. And so I think that 18-game point streak is really where a lot of their problems started. And either, like, again, maybe that was real. Maybe that was the real team, the real Nashville Predators under Andrew Brunette. But that's where those heightened expectations started coming from. It was after that. It was like you said, okay, we got it. It took them a minute, but we figured it out. We got it. And then we said, coming into this year, you got these new additions, and it's not just like you added some depth pieces, like you added franchise altering pieces to your roster, and you gotta maybe not reconfigure the system, but like this system, those are the guys that you build a system around. Yes. And seeing how they were going to fit in, we said from the beginning, we're like, patience, everyone, this might take a minute. none of us thought that it was going to be this bad. And not only, I think what I won't speak for you, Anne, but I know for me personally, I think I was like, okay, it's going to be a slow start. It might look a little bit like the start of the season last year. Like
Mhm.
it might we might, fall back into that, but they'll eventually figure it out. It was worse. It was worse
Oh,
than
so
last
bad.
year. And it wasn't just the start. It was the whole season was worse than anything that we saw last year. And so, of course, you start looking at all of these things. Why? And why don't you have the answers? And all of that. I think it's, a big part of it is that point streak is what heightened the expectations. It's what made Barry Trotz think, whether fairly or unfairly, it made Barry Trotz and not just him, a lot of us, it made them think that the Nashville Predators are a lot closer than they actually are to
Mhm.
contending. And so I think that all of that, you get this kind of, like you said, this false sense of hope in this team. And then this year, it all just comes crashing down. Again, they didn't just revert back to where they were. They fell back several steps, behind where they were. And so that is what is so, again, it's hard to pin it on one thing like, yes, this is the reason for it. But I think that it really does kind of go back to that point streak from last year, because that's where that was the first domino to fall, I think,
Yes.
where all of these other things start happening.
Yes. That, and then signing UC Saros, and then signing Stamkos and Marchessault, and then you are at high expectations. You mentioned the bad start. Preds started 0-5, and that puts you in a hole right off the bat. But I don't think it was the win-loss hole that was the problem for Nashville with that 0-5 start. I really think it was the panic. Because in that 0-5 start, Andrew Brunette, and right or wrong, we're still going to have to weigh this out, began the line blender really early. And you and I talked about this back then. It almost sends a message of panic. And when you get that message of like, hey, what we're doing isn't working, we have to do something else, that is unnerving for those who were there for the 18 game point streak. That is unnerving for those who just joined the team and are supposed to be leading this team. And they're like, wait a minute, I thought these were going to be my line mates, and now it's not going to work. And the line that was so good last season is now broken up. It just became panic. There is the pressure of now we have to dig out of an 0-5 start. And this is one of those things where I'm like, I think this feels like you really do have to look at the head coach. Not so much about the 0-5 start, but how did he handle the 0-5 start? And I think that's something Barry Trotz is going to have to weigh. Did Andrew Brunette's line blender early set this team back when it came to chemistry? From the outside looking in, looks a little suspicious. But Barry Trotz is going to have to weigh that. And then Andrew Brunette says, you get to that 0-5 start, and then you fall into bad habits because you are chasing games and you have the immediate pressure we've got to dig out. When you look at the whole of the season, Emma, just I love this question. Give me a percentage. How much of what Nashville went through, as Andrew Brunette laid it out, expectations, the bad start, falling into bad habits, and then falling into just the mental toll that this season took, how much of that falls on the head coach?
Oh, it's so hard to say.
It's so hard. Yeah.
I think that, everything that we're talking about with the high expectations based on what happened last year, that includes the head coach, because he was a Jack Adams finalist last year. Remember that?
Yes. Yes.
And
I
now it's
do.
kind of now it's kind of funny, because at the time he made a joke about how the last time he was a Jack Adams finalist, he lost his job. That was when he was in Florida. And now it's like, interesting.
Huh.
History does repeat. Well, maybe. But I think that part of that is the expectations and the weight of them and all of that. On one hand, you're the head coach. You don't build the roster. You don't really have a hand in that at all. You have to work with what you're given. And it's one thing to add, for him to come in and take a team that had very little expected of them and defy expectations and make that run and be like, hey, look, we made it. That's cool. But when you are handed players with multiple Stanley Cups and Conn Smythe trophies and all of these things, and like you are handed future Hall of Famers, and you're told, hey, we saw what you did last year. We love it. Great. As a thank you, here is Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault and Brady Shea. Go, like that's your reward for what you did last year. Now go win us a cup. Now, no one necessarily thought the cup was coming this year, but still, it was, a sign, a vote of confidence, I think, not just in the team. And obviously we're going to talk about the team more and, later this week and what they had to say and their contributions. But I think that part of that is on the coach. I think a big part of that is on the coach, because it's like, okay, the head coach isn't responsible for everything. Like I said, he doesn't build the roster, but it's what he does with the roster and putting guys in the right positions to succeed. And no one was in a position long enough at any point this year to know. And like you said, whether it was panic or not, it sent a message of panic. And that definitely seemed like it had to have some kind of effect on the players.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what Barry Trotz does. Coming up, we're going to tell you the things that we think Barry Trotz has to weigh the heaviest as he gets ready to make a decision about who the head coach of the Nashville Predators will be next season. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? You can turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports, College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It is gaming made simple, and it is all on your Fire TV. You can play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. If you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable, and it's easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Emma, we are hoping to hear Barry Trotz's decision this week. He is holding media availability to kind of wrap up the season and talk about what is next for the Nashville Predators. Part of that discussion, everybody is waiting to hear who will be the head coach. And when it comes to what Barry Trotz has to decide, this is a tricky onion to peel in a lot of ways. But I keep coming back to the question, if nothing changes, what changes? Barry Trotz is not going to do enough with the draft where Nashville is going to get a high pick, top 5 pick. And in free agency, I don't know that Barry Trotz can do enough to make it feel like, hey, this is a different team. And we're taking a giant step forward. We are moving on from what just happened. And whether it is accurate or not, the easiest move for Barry Trotz to make to say this was not acceptable and we have to kind of pivot is to move on from Andrew Brunette. It seems obvious that, of course, when you have a season like the Preds had, you've got to get rid of the head coach. There's a lot going into it because I don't know if you know yet which is real. Is it Andrew Brunette, Jack Adams finalist, or is it Andrew Brunette, panic line blender? I don't know which one is real. And the Nashville Predators, Barry Trotz has to make a decision based on the information in front of him. And I don't know even if even Barry Trotz will be able to accurately assess it 100%.
And that is hard. That's the hardest part out of all of this, because again, he overachieved with the first team he had, the team with no expectations. And that's impressive, but also, like, even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes.
100%.
I think, it happens. Teams overachieve. I mean, look at the Montreal Canadiens this year, the Ottawa Senators. Neither of those teams were expected to be where they are. They're in the playoffs right now. And I think, again, with the Predators, it happens. Things like that happen every year. The St. Louis Blues, they, no one knew what they were doing this year, and look at them now. So
Yep.
I think that is, like, it was an accomplishment. He was rewarded for that accomplishment. And now, I think it's more of an indictment of the head coach if you vastly underperform with a team like the one that Andrew Brunette had this year. To overperform, outperform expectations, good for you guys. No one really thought you were going to do anything anyway. But now, if you can't handle that, for, whether it's conscious or not, if you can't handle that, then I don't know, man, because it's hard. Like, looking at, like you said, something has to happen. You cannot have the second worst season in franchise history, much less with these guys on your roster. This is not the San Jose Sharks. Like, they are not rebuilding. Like, they were doing the opposite. They were full sending. And it worked out so terribly. So you can't have the season that you just had and be like, all right, let's run it back. Same guys, same everything. Let's just run it back and hope for the best with duct tape and a dream. Let's just hope for the best. And it's like, no, like, something has to change. Now, again, is it all Andrew Brunette's fault? No, it doesn't all fall on one person. Like, part of the blame goes to him. Part of it goes to Barry Trotz. Part of it goes to everyone else. There's plenty to go around. But the fact remains, you can't fire an entire team, even if you wanted to. So many of these guys have trade and movement protection, so they're not going anywhere unless they want to. And you talk about, like, oh, this is big draft coming up for Barry Trotz. It's really important what he does in the draft. It is, yes, but there is still a very good chance that the Predators do not finish in the top 3 of the draft order. There is a very good chance that they pick 4th or 5th. And if you're banking on them to get someone like James Hagens, first of all, James Hagens, even if the Predators do pick him, he's not going to be in Nashville next year. He's going to be at Boston College. So if you're looking for one draft prospect to come in and just turn this franchise around, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so I think that, like, yes, the draft is going to be very important for Barry Trotz and the Predators, no doubt about that. But I think that you can't be looking at what's ahead yet. You have to reflect on what just happened. You want to flush it and be like, oh, bad memories. But I mean, when it was so historically bad and, like, had no reason to be, you need to start looking at, okay, what can we do to change this?
Yeah, you have to dive into this. I love what you say about, you can't just flush it. There are going to be some things about this season that you are going to have to flush. But the majority of what happened with the Nashville Predators, you have to get it under a microscope and you have to dig around until you can figure out here are 2 or 3 decisions that likely led to this. You have to be able to do that. The most important question that I think Barry Trotz has to be able to answer, and that should guide him when it comes to what he does with Andrew Brunette, is are the players in with Andrew Brunette? And I think you need your core players to be in. You need Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg, Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault. You need Brady Shea. You need those core players to be so sure that Andrew Brunette can do this. That is what you have to have right now. You need those players to be so sure that Andrew Brunette can do it. And if there is even a doubt, then Barry Trotz has a problem. It's going to come down to, are the players bought in with Andrew Brunette?
And people love to go fishing for things like, oh, well, this player made this one comment, so obviously he's not in. Listen, you can disagree with decisions that a coach makes, and that doesn't mean that you're like all out on the coach. Now, I'm not saying here for sure the players are all in on Andrew Brunette. I'm also not saying that they're all out. I genuinely don't know. These guys are pros. They're not going to air their dirty laundry. Yeah, they're not going to squeal. So again, at this point, it's kind of a fool's errand trying to just sort of nitpick and dissect everything that everyone's saying and be like, oh, there it is. That was the nugget that told us, So I think that I do think you're right, though. I think that the players need to be absolutely bought in. Now, the players are absolutely bought in on winning. And
Yes.
they didn't come here to, just put up their feet and just ride off into the sunset. They are bought in on that. So it's good to know that they are all sort of, aligned in that sense, but they have to be aligned with the coaching staff too. And that it's hard to really get a good feel on that right now. We just don't know.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what Barry Trotz has to say to the media about the coaching, what decision he's going to make moving forward. Of course, we will cover that this week as Barry Trotz holds his media availability. On tomorrow's show, we are going to break down what Steven Stamkos had to say about his first season as a Nashville Predator. Some really great comments from Stamkos. He's going to talk about what this season felt like to him, what is and is not important to him moving forward, and what he learned. Really big lesson Steven Stamkos shared with us about what he learned getting through this really tough season. So we're going to cover Stamkos's comments on tomorrow's show. Make sure you tune in for that. Emma, before we log off today, will you let everyone know where can they find you and your work?
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
You can find me on social media at @AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We're going to be back tomorrow sharing with you what Steven Stamkos had to say about this past season. We will see you then.